year. Yet President Putin seemed to blame the West, saying Russia will never fail to defend its freedom.
No one will succeed in achieving military superiority over Russia. Our army is modern, combat ready, polite as people say now, but threatening. We have enough forces, will, and courage to defend our freedom.
Of course, the U.S. and other Western countries sanctioned Russia for invading Crimea and supporting the rebels in East Ukraine. But President Putin says those enemies are just looking for a way to contain Russia. Earlier today, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said that the Russian president has repeatedly tried to shift blame for his country's problems. He says Russia's narrative is unconvincing. General Wesley Clark joins us now. He's served as NATO's supreme commander in Europe and served as in the U.S. Army for almost 40 years. Wesley Clark is the author of the book, Don't Wait for the Next War. Sir, it's great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shep.
What do you do about this guy? What can you do about Vladimir Putin?
Well, Putin is a very dangerous leader. He's willing to use military force. He's proved it. He has invested in modernization of the Russian armed forces, and there's an active fight going on in Ukraine today as we speak. He's got to be contained, and he's got to be persuaded that he cannot resort to military means. So the Ukrainians are putting up a brave defense there. We've got sanctions on. We've got to hold NATO together. We've got to reassure our allies in Europe. And we've got to provide the economic and political support to Ukraine so they can resist Russian aggression.
How dangerous do you see Vladimir Putin, say, in comparison to some previous Russian leaders?
I think he's the most dangerous Russian leader since Stalin. He wants to change the status quo, and he's not afraid to commit military forces and take losses to do it. Shep, the Russians have lost, both from their conventional military and these thugs they recruited to fight in eastern Ukraine. They've lost, by Ukrainian estimates, over 4,000 troops since they started fighting there in the spring. I'm not talking about Crimea. I'm talking about eastern Ukraine. And they used modern military means, multiple launched rockets with drones overhead. The Ukrainians also had high losses. And Putin's done everything he can to conceal these losses from the Russian people. He doesn't want to admit that Russian forces are actually there. I was in Ukraine 3 weeks ago. At that time, there were 8,000 Russian troops in eastern Ukraine in 10 battle groups. They had modern Russian tanks. They had modern artillery. They had modern armored fighting vehicles. And we don't know what his intent is, but he's building up forces, and he could be preparing to launch another military strike against Ukraine.
He's got serious problems. The ruble is in free fall. Oil is, the prices of oil are way down. That's how he funds the place. He has all these conflicts around him, and the oligarchs who he's given all the money to are trying to get their money out of Russia. So everything is collapsing around him, and I wonder how much more dangerous you think that makes him in this sort of cornered tiger scenario.
It might make it more dangerous. You know, if you go back to the 1930s when we cut off steel and oil for Japan, it was one of the precipitating factors of World War II. And so the fact that we're not using military force against Putin doesn't mean that when he's suffering these economic consequences of his actions, he may not decide to respond militarily. But he's playing a very large game, Shep. He's playing with and against the United States in the Middle East, in Syria, on the Iran nuclear talks. So there's lots of pieces on the chessboard.
Is his goal as simple as, I want some pieces of the old Soviet Union back, or is it bigger and more complicated than that?
Well, we know it's at least that, and then the question is, where does his ambition extend to? And we don't know the answer to that, but we don't want to find out either. You know, if you go back to the analogy to Adolf Hitler in the 1930s when he reoccupied the Rhineland, maybe if we had opposed that, maybe we'd never have had World War II. But when aggressors and people with those tendencies get away with it, their ambitions grow. And that, of course, is the risk that we're dealing with Vladimir Putin.
Wise words from General Wesley Clark, live with us this afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shep.
Al-Qaeda terrorists giving Washington just days to respond after releasing a new video of an American hostage. Ahead, who this hostage is and how the